On Saturday morning, soft sunlight danced across the kitchen counter as it streamed through the window. Patricia stood by the window, enjoying the aroma of coffee while gazing at her well-tended garden. Red roses glistened with morning dew as birds chirped their morning songs. The lavender she had planted last weekend was already beginning to flourish. "Grandma, can I add chocolate chips?" Nathan's cheerful voice brought Patricia back to reality. The 5-year-old stood waiting, wearing an apron and holding measuring cups in both hands. The hem of his apron already bore traces of flour. He looked just like Michael did at that age. "Of course, sweetheart. But remember, if we add too many, they'll melt together. Let's measure out just the right amount." Patricia gently wrapped her hands around her grandson's, helping him measure the proper amount. Nathan's eyes sparkled with joy. The sweet scent of vanilla extract wafted through the kitchen. "I love coming to Grandma's house. Your cookies are the best." His innocent smile filled Patricia's heart with warmth. In the 3 years since losing her husband, these weekends with her grandson had become her reason for living. Photos of memories with her husband adorned the kitchen walls. He, too, had loved these chocolate chip cookies dearly. Since retiring from her 30-year career as a high school English teacher, she had been spending her time gardening and reading, but nothing brought her more joy than these moments with her family. Reading the occasional letters from her former students was another pleasure she treasured. "Grandma, can I take some of these cookies to Dad?" Nathan asked with a serious expression. "Of course, dear. I'm sure your father will love them," Patricia answered with a smile. Her son Michael was thriving as an accomplished engineer, and his wife Rachel had earned high regard as a nurse at the regional hospital. They had made it a point to spend their weekends at Patricia's house, and were known throughout the neighborhood as an exemplary family. At Sunday church, their presence in the front row was considered a model for the community. Sunday family dinners featured backyard barbecues, and the whole family attended Nathan's school events together. At last month's music recital, Michael and Rachel had proudly applauded Nathan's piano performance. However, these peaceful days began to change this spring. Rachel's overtime hours increased, and she became inseparable from her smartphone. While she explained it as emergency hospital duties, the frequency was clearly unusual. She became less attentive to picking up and dropping off Nathan. She started running late for appointments and became increasingly unreachable. Last-minute cancellations of family plans became commonplace. Rachel's usually impeccable appearance began to show signs of disorder. While she bought expensive designer bags, the dark circles under her eyes grew deeper by the day. Michael's business trips also increased, and Patricia worriedly observed the declining communication between the couple. Whenever she tried to voice her concerns about her son's exhausted appearance, he would just smile dismissively and say, "It's just work keeping me busy, Mom." Then one day, Nathan's whispered words planted a seed of worry in her heart. "I'm scared of Mom." When she heard those words, Patricia wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. Instead, all she could do was hold her grandson tightly. She could feel his small body trembling slightly. An unsettling shadow began to form in Patricia's mind, and her solitary prayer times grew longer. The evening sun quietly painted the kitchen counter as it streamed through the living room window. In the oven, the chocolate chip cookies that Nathan and Patricia had made were slowly baking, filling the air with their sweet aroma. The scent seemed to want to preserve this peaceful moment forever. Late one night, Patricia's phone rang. "Mrs. Williams. This is the Grand Rapids Police Department." The voice on the other end sounded strangely cold. Her son Michael had been in an accident, crashing into a guardrail on the highway. It happened on I-96 eastbound, 40 miles from Grand Rapids. He had been rushed to the hospital but was pronounced dead at the scene. "No, it can't be." The receiver nearly slipped from Patricia's hand. While she was overcome with shock, the police officer continued explaining the details of the accident matter-of-factly. They suspected he had fallen asleep at the wheel. It was a single-vehicle accident late at night. There were no skid marks at the scene, suggesting he hadn't applied the brakes. The events that followed remain in her memory like a hazy fog. The fluorescent lights of the hospital in the middle of the night. Her son's cold hand. And Rachel, handling the procedures with an oddly calm demeanor. It may take some time for the accident investigation results to come in. While the detective in charge said this, Rachel had already begun the insurance claim process. To Patricia, it seemed suspiciously hasty. "We've decided to move away." Just 2 weeks after her son's funeral, Rachel made this announcement. She said she wanted to start fresh in a new environment. She had found a suitable property near a northern tourist area. Patricia tried to object, but Rachel's determination was firm. There was a strange gleam in her eyes. "But what about Nathan's school? His friends?" Patricia asked. "Everything's already arranged. The new school is wonderful." Rachel's response was as smooth as if it had been rehearsed. On moving day, workers carried out furniture one after another. Patricia watched Rachel's back as she carried cardboard boxes from Nathan's room. There was something mechanically cold about her movements. "Grandma, we'll see each other again, right?" Nathan asked, clutching a picture of a blue bird to his chest. Patricia hugged her grandson tightly as she answered. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll come visit you whenever I can." About 2 months later, one afternoon, Patricia's cell phone rang. She had been knitting by the window, where spring sunlight was streaming in. "Mrs. Williams, I'm sorry, but Nathan has gone missing from school." The moment she heard those words, an ominous feeling ran through Patricia's mind. She rushed to her car and drove to the police station in the new town. A large-scale search was initiated, but no clues were found. The police tried to treat it as a routine missing persons case, but Patricia felt something was wrong. Rachel's reaction was unnaturally calm for a mother. She neither cried out nor became distraught, but seemed to just quietly accept the situation. By the third day, the search had expanded statewide. News crews descended on the area, and Nathan's smiling photo was repeatedly shown on television news. Local volunteers joined the search, distributing flyers and combing through forests and parks. Then a week later, Rachel disappeared too. The apartment she left behind showed signs of methodical cleaning. In the drawers were copies of Michael's life insurance documents. Records of large sums withdrawn 3 days after the insurance payout. It was clearly a planned disappearance. 5 years passed. One morning, Patricia headed to her front door as usual to get the newspaper. The roses in her garden sparkled with morning dew. When she looked at her mailbox, she noticed an unfamiliar white envelope. There was no sender's name or address. When she picked it up, she found a single sheet of notepaper inside. It was cream-colored, high-quality paper. However, the ink appeared to be from an inexpensive ballpoint pen. With trembling hands, she took it out. What caught her eye was a message written in uneven handwriting. "Dear Grandma, help me. Get me out of here. Mom and Dad are lying. The police won't help. You're my only hope. Love, Nathan." Patricia's vision blurred. Her hands shook, nearly dropping the note. Though the writing was uneven, she could see the careful effort put into each letter. When she quickly turned the paper over, there was a postscript. "P.S. Do you remember my picture? The blue bird I drew that was on your refrigerator? I want to fly free like that bird." In that moment, Patricia's suspicions turned to certainty. This was undoubtedly a letter from Nathan. Only family would know about that picture. The picture he had held so preciously on moving day, Nathan hadn't forgotten about it. She rushed to the kitchen and picked up the phone with trembling hands. But as she held the receiver, she stopped. As the letter suggested, the local police might not be trustworthy. She needed to take a more reliable approach. This might be why no one had found him in 5 years. Patricia took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She carefully placed the letter in a plastic bag and grabbed her wallet and handbag. As she headed to the door, her reflection in the living room mirror looked surprisingly dignified. She called a taxi and gave directions to the state police headquarters. The green trees reflected in the car window seemed to sway vigorously, as if encouraging her determination. The envelope in her hand felt slightly warm, like the warmth of Nathan's small hand. "Nathan, I promise I'll find you." Patricia made a vow in her heart. It was time to fulfill the promise she had made to her grandson 5 years ago. The taxi continued quietly through the misty streets. Somewhere in this city, her beloved grandson must be waiting. At the state police headquarters forensics lab, the letter was being carefully examined. Under yellowed fluorescent lights, experts in white coats studied the single sheet of notepaper. The air in the room was tense. "Mrs. Williams, this is undoubtedly your grandson's handwriting," the handwriting expert declared, looking up from his magnifying glass. After comparing it with report cards and schoolwork from 5 years ago, they confirmed that even at age 10, his writing characteristics remained. While the notepaper is common, analysis of the ink might help us determine where it was mailed from. The chemical analyst continued explaining. The ballpoint pen used was a budget brand sold exclusively at a specific convenience store chain. There were only 3 stores from this chain near the Mackinac Bridge. From the black ink component analysis, they identified the manufacturing lot. In this area, it had been sold just 1 week before the letter was mailed. The investigation showed progress from unexpected directions as well. The financial transaction analysis team was thoroughly investigating Rachel's past bank records. "Look at these suspicious deposit patterns." The analyst pointed to the monitor. 3 days after Michael's life insurance payout, cash was deposited into multiple accounts in distributed amounts. Then each month, a fixed amount was withdrawn and transferred to different accounts. The withdrawals always occurred between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m., carefully timed between hospital shift changes. This is a typical money laundering pattern. Everything from receiving the insurance money to the planned fund transfers was meticulously calculated. The investigators' eyes lit up. Real estate transaction records were also uncovered, revealing the flow of funds to the Pine Grove Inn near Mackinac Bridge. A phone call came into the investigation headquarters. Someone had information about the Pine Grove Inn. It was a hoarse but resolute elderly woman's voice. That evening, in the interrogation room, Patricia met Dorothy Baker for the first time. The 72-year-old was a gentlewoman who had worked at the post office for 35 years. She wore a gray cardigan and a small pearl necklace. However, contrary to her peaceful appearance, her testimony struck at the heart of the case. "I stay at that motel for about 2 weeks every 2 months. After losing my grandson Jimmy in an accident, I started taking these trips occasionally for a change of scenery." Dorothy began speaking quietly. She had witnessed suspicious activities at the motel. In particular, she had been concerned about a boy who was introduced as a niece's child. "I didn't notice at first. But those eyes, something was different. There was an indescribable sadness behind his smile." Brief conversations during cleaning times. Small gestures in the surveillance camera blind spots. And the boy's pleading looks. Over 6 months, Dorothy's suspicions grew stronger. "My grandson would have been about his age. That's why I could understand the pain behind those eyes." Dorothy's testimony was specific and convincing. She had secretly taken photos with her smartphone. Suspicious people coming and going from the warehouse behind the motel. Police vehicles frequently visiting late at night. And Rachel appearing in flashy clothes with expensive designer bags. "I helped with the letter. I felt guilty, but I couldn't find any other way to save him." The interrogation room fell silent at this confession. Dorothy began explaining the details. Her voice was quiet but firm. She described how she had gradually built trust with Nathan during each stay. How she learned who he really was through brief conversations during cleaning. How she suggested writing the letter and planned to mail it from a town 50 miles away. Everything had been carefully prepared over time. That boy tried so hard. He practiced writing over and over, but had to do it secretly, between making beds. Patricia felt tears welling up. As she listened to the testimony, her heart filled with thoughts of her grandson. Dorothy's testimony led to uncovering the motel's true nature. While appearing normal on the surface, it was actually an important hub for drug trafficking. Oliver Cooper, who posed as the owner, was actually a senior member of a drug trafficking organization. And Rachel was a key collaborator, supplying drugs diverted from the hospital. 24-hour surveillance cameras. But strangely, the local police never raid the place. In fact, several officers are regular customers. At Dorothy's words, the investigators exchanged glances. Collusion with local police. That explained why the case had remained unsolved for 5 years. Reviewing the investigation records revealed numerous pieces of evidence that had been intentionally overlooked during the initial investigation. further investigation revealed more detailed realities. Nathan was forced to live in a converted basement room and work as cleaning staff. His outings were strictly limited, and use of mobile phones and internet was completely prohibited. Oliver had constructed an elaborate surveillance system to prevent escape. The truth about Michael's murder also came to light. Rachel had used her position as a nurse to mix sleeping pills into her husband's coffee. She had staged it to look like an accident. Her obsession with insurance money and a new life had triggered this tragedy. "Mrs. Williams, we have all the evidence we need," Chief Investigator Johnson announced solemnly. Preparations for the arrests were steadily progressing. Coordination with Child Protective Services was established, and psychological counselors were standing by. Evidence was perfectly secured, and preparations for prosecution were complete. Surveillance camera footage, financial records, letter analysis results, and Dorothy's testimony. These would be the decisive evidence breaking 5 years of silence. Media response preparations were also in place. Press conference arrangements were made and announcement materials prepared. However, the most important thing was Nathan's safe recovery. "We'll take action tonight." The State Police Special Operations Commander began the final strategy meeting. The arrest time was set for 6 a.m. tomorrow. They would target the quietest time at the motel. Patricia listened to these words with a prayerful heart. By tomorrow morning, it would all be over. She quietly but surely waited for the moment she would see her grandson again. The next morning, the area around Pine Grove and near Mackinac Bridge was still wrapped in pre-dawn silence. Only a few cars were parked in the motel lot, with no sign of people. The Special Operations Team's black van approached silently with lights off. 3 patrol cars took positions surrounding the motel from different directions. All sirens remained silent, out of consideration for the neighbors and, more importantly, for Nathan's psychological well-being. Under the dim sky, Special Operations Team members in black uniforms scattered to their positions like shadows. The moment the office door opened, Oliver Cooper was reaching for his desk drawer. However, the Special Operations Team's quick restraint left his hand grasping at air. A loaded handgun was found in the drawer. Simultaneously, Rachel was secured in a second-floor room. Wearing expensive silk pajamas, she maintained an eerily calm demeanor despite her surprised expression. "I have the right to call a lawyer." Those were her first words. The priority was Nathan's protection. Child Services staff and a female police officer headed to the basement conversion room. When they opened the door, Nathan was already awake in the small room. "Nathan, you're safe now. We're here to help you." The female officer spoke gently. The boy showed a momentary look of confusion but seemed to quickly understand the situation. "Where's Grandma?" Those were his first words. "You'll see her soon. But first, let's have a doctor check you out." In the ambulance, an initial medical examination was conducted. Fortunately, there were no signs of serious physical trauma or malnutrition. However, the psychological scars left by 5 years of captivity were immeasurable. Patricia had been waiting in the state police headquarters waiting room for over an hour. While waiting for the initial consultation with the psychological counselor to end, her heart continued beating rapidly. In her hands, she clutched the blue bird picture Nathan had drawn 5 years ago. "Mrs. Williams, please come in." At the sound of the door opening, Patricia tensed involuntarily. She stepped into the meeting room. There sat a boy who had grown much taller. A moment of silence hung in the air. "Grandma." Nathan's voice trembled slightly. "Nathan." Patricia stumbled forward. The boy stood up and slowly walked toward her. "You've grown so much." Patricia's voice broke. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I missed you so much." Nathan's voice was shaking too. They embraced quietly. No words were necessary. Their bond as grandmother and grandson had grown stronger across the 5-year divide. Psychological counselor Allison Brown watched this reunion from a distance. To her professional eye, it was clear this moment would be a crucial first step in Nathan's recovery. "You still have the blue bird picture." Nathan noticed the drawing in Patricia's hands. "I've treasured it all this time." Patricia answered with a smile. The subsequent questioning was conducted with utmost care. Considering Nathan's psychological burden, it was broken into short sessions. His testimony revealed the reality of his 5 years in captivity. Life under strict control. Days completely cut off from the outside world. Yet he never lost hope. Every day, he mentally repeated his grandmother's address. And his encounter with Dorothy had opened his path to freedom. By evening, a temporary protection order was issued. The process to transfer custody to Patricia would be expedited. "We'll start the procedures for a new school right away," the Child Services social worker explained. "Regular counseling will also be necessary." Patricia listened intently to everything. In her arms, Nathan had finally fallen into a peaceful sleep. Outside the window, the sunset was gently coloring the city, as if announcing the beginning of a new life. "Grandma, I never want to be apart again," Nathan murmured, half asleep. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I won't let anyone take you away ever again," Patricia answered, gently stroking her grandson's hair. In the interrogation room, Rachel and Oliver's questioning continued. But that was now a world apart from Patricia and Nathan. At the Michigan Supreme Court, the Chief Justice's voice echoed solemnly through the courtroom. Rachel, her expensive designer suit offering no comfort, listened to the verdict with a hard expression. No trace remained of the once capable nurse. Then came the verdicts for her accomplices. For the defendant Oliver Cooper, on charges of RICO Act violations, drug trafficking, and child imprisonment, the court sentences you to life imprisonment. For defendants James Morrison and Mark Sanders, on charges of abuse of authority, evidence tampering, and conspiracy in organized crime, the court sentences each of you to 20 years imprisonment. The local police officers arrested as accomplices also received harsh sentences. After 5 years, the darkness was finally dispelled by the light of justice. Patricia closed her eyes quietly in the gallery. It was all over. No, they had reached a new beginning. In a suburban neighborhood of Grand Rapids, new sprouts were beginning to emerge in Patricia's garden, heralding the arrival of spring. A new herb garden spread between the rose bushes. "Grandma, the sage smells amazing." Nathan called out, taking a break from his garden work. The apron he wore for gardening was the same one he'd used for baking cookies, though it was a bit small now. It certainly does. They seem to be growing well this year. Patricia smiled, noting her grandson's growth. Now 11, Nathan had become quite sturdy. 3 weekly counseling sessions and life at his new school were gradually healing his emotional wounds. Dorothy will be happy to see this too. Saying this, Nathan waved to the neighboring house. Dorothy Baker had moved next door after the incident. Her presence had become an invaluable support for both Patricia and Nathan. You have cooking class this afternoon, don't you? Yes. We're learning to make Italian pasta today. Nathan's dream was to become a chef. He was trying to turn his experience of being forced to work in the motel kitchen during his captivity into his strength. In the future, I want to open my own restaurant. I want to cook wonderful meals for you and Dorothy. Those words brought tears to Patricia's eyes. She felt deeply moved seeing her grandson walking toward a new dream after overcoming such difficult experiences. Meanwhile, in her state prison cell, Rachel's mental state deteriorated day by day. The price she paid for her obsession with a luxurious lifestyle was far too heavy. No one visited her. Even her former colleagues kept their distance after her involvement in the drug diversion scheme came to light. Was I wrong? She repeated to herself, her appearance no longer bearing any resemblance to the beautiful nurse she once was. She who had dreamed of a life surrounded by luxury brands now wore gray prison garb, spending her days in regret in a narrow cell. Oliver Cooper also faced harsh reality. Completely isolated from other inmates in prison, he lived in constant fear of retaliation from the drug organization. The once cold drug ring executive was now nothing more than a frightened prisoner. One Sunday afternoon, a familiar aroma wafted through Patricia's kitchen. "Grandma, this time I'll teach you how to make professional chocolate chip cookies." Nathan demonstrated the techniques he'd learned in cooking class. His movements while measuring ingredients were precise, and his oven temperature management was perfect. My goodness, just like a professional. My cooking teacher always says, even painful experiences can become treasures if you use them right. At those words, Patricia and Dorothy exchanged glances. They felt deeply moved seeing how the boy had grown so resilient after overcoming his painful past. The evening sun streamed through the living room window. In the herb garden, sage leaves swayed in the breeze. The aroma of freshly baked cookies drifted from the kitchen. You know, Grandma, this house is my favorite place in the whole world. At Nathan's words, Patricia nodded quietly. After a 5-year void, they had truly become a family in the deepest sense. And the blue bird picture still hangs on the refrigerator, a firm promise that they will never be separated again.